Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to today's Play Attention webinar. My name is Gwen Sorley, and I will be your host today. I'm really glad that we're able to spend this time together and chat a little bit more about ADHD and women. And I want you to remember that May is Women's Health Month. So for all of the women here today, I do hope you're taking special care. Just maybe take a moment more than you typically do to make certain that you are doing well overall, not just your physical health, but your mental health as well. Because it's really easy for us to get caught up in the day-to-day and we start focusing on everyone else except ourselves. We take care of everyone else. So it's important you take a moment and check in with yourself, not just this month, but every month. But this is a good time to reflect in May while it's Women's Health Month and make certain that you are taking care of yourself. Because remember, you must put on your oxygen mask first before you can adequately help others. So we're all here together today. Our paths have crossed because we have all been touched in some way by ADHD. We are all on a journey of learning and discovery. Now, some of you may have been on this journey for several years. This is an ongoing journey for you. And so you may have had several different experiences and insights. But for others of you here today, this may be a very new and confusing world. It may be very unfamiliar to you. So we have a lot of different individuals in our audience today. Some of you have a lot of experience in this field. Some of you are just now getting introduced to this area. So wherever you are on your journey, I'm glad you're here today so that we can talk a little bit about ADHD, but more specific, talk about ADHD and women. My personal journey in the field of ADHD started about 30 years ago. So it was when I was in grad school and I was working on my master's in education. And we were assigned a project to do. And the project was to research and present a specific learning challenge or difficulty. So I started looking through our text, and there was a lot of information on dyslexia. There was a lot of information there that told us about learning disabilities in reading and writing and math. There was information on delayed motor skills. There was even information on auditory processing disorder. And then I came across this one paragraph that explained ADHD. In 4 lines, everything we knew, everything we were taught was summarized in 4 lines. That's what we were taught on ADHD. That was 1994. And of course, there was no mention of ADHD carrying into adulthood, and certainly no mention of the challenges girls and women face. It was the classic, your student will appear to be driven by a motor, really hyperactive. So it was the classic image of the little boy with hyperactivity. So I did more research. I did find more than those 4 little lines and presented my paper. 2 years later, I was teaching in a public school setting, and the special education director gave me the opportunity to spearhead a program for students with ADHD. That was Play Attention. So that was in 1996. I started using Play Attention with my students. But our special ed director, he was amazing. So yes, he wanted us to use Play Attention for our students who were in the special ed program and had a 504 or an IEP. But his vision for the program really was to provide that intervention for students who would never be identified, would never receive any special services because they were falling through the cracks, because the difficulties they had were with attention, were with weak executive function. So I started working with lots of different individuals at that time. Fast forward 30 years later, and here I am with Play Attention, and I've worked with thousands of individuals from the age of 5 all the way up through adulthood. So I've had a lot of experience in this field. Now, the most interesting thing has been in the last 4 years, we've seen an incredible shift in our client base. Our largest growing population, our main population of clients right now, are women between the ages of 45 and 75. And this has been an incredible shift, like I said, just over the last 4 years. So that's why I thought it was really important to have this conversation together today. So I do want us to start with that understanding that you are not alone. It's sometimes difficult because we think that we're the only ones out here struggling with these areas. So tell me right now, and I'm going to actually put a poll up on the screen. Let me get my poll here. And I want you to just indicate where you are in this journey. So let us know what you've experienced. You should see the poll on your screen right now. You can either type them in or just plug them in where you are. I think you should be able to select multiple. I was misdiagnosed. I was diagnosed late in life, or I am currently undiagnosed, or you may be really just uncertain where you are in this process. Let's go ahead and share where we are. Okay. I'm going to close the poll. Thank you for your responses. And it looks like the largest majority of us here, 80% of you, said that you were diagnosed late in life. And that's really understandable, especially as we go through this webinar today. We're going to talk more about why that occurs. Oh, now it went up. 81% of you were diagnosed late in life. 19% of you said you were misdiagnosed, and 22% said you're still undiagnosed or maybe uncertain. So that's really significant, isn't it? Our largest number of individuals here were diagnosed late in life. Rebecca says she was diagnosed after she survived a severe traumatic brain injury. And that's important too, because we're going to talk a lot about comorbidity. And so, Rebecca, thank you for sharing that information. We all have different experiences who had led us to this diagnosis or that path. ADHD in girls and women has been undiagnosed and misunderstood. And that is a real challenge because the lack of understanding, the lack of diagnosis, the proper diagnosis, has really had negative consequences or serious consequences over time. Okay. Ricky says that she was diagnosed in grade 3, was angry, hyperactive, and couldn't focus on schoolwork without interrupting other students. So that is really important to share as well as part of your experience. Now, when we look at why there is so many misunderstandings or misdiagnoses or girls and women who have just flew under the radar, there is a gender bias. ADHD has been perceived as predominantly affecting males. And this is because in childhood, this is where you are typically diagnosed with ADHD. Many people are diagnosed with ADHD. It's when it first appears. However, the problem is that the ADHD diagnosis has been that image of the little boy who's bouncing off the walls, right? And you may think, well, that's not me. That's not my daughter. And so there has always been this gender bias. The CDC states that boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD compared to girls. Now, that's a little bit better than it has been in the past, because in the past, we've seen up to boys being 4 times as likely to be diagnosed. So we do see that gender gap is closing just a little bit, and we're going to talk about why. So let's look at the gender bias factors. There are many, but the two main ones here that I have listed is that girls and women with ADHD tend to mask or hide their symptoms because they are trying to conform to societal expectations. There are a lot of expectations of us throughout our lives, and so you may mask those symptoms in order to try to conform. The other is that co-occurring conditions, such as anxiety, depression, those are more common in girls with ADHD. So oftentimes, if there's anxiety or depression, those tend to be the diagnosis. And it's very difficult because there's oftentimes comorbidity where there's anxiety and depression and ADHD. And it's difficult at times because you don't know where one ends and the other begins because they're so interrelated. So that can really lead to that misdiagnosis, or at least missing one of the conditions, which is ADHD. Gender bias is not new in women's health. You can look at a lot of different women health issues and see gender bias. One is the hysterectomy. If you look up the history of the hysterectomy, it may surprise you if you haven't looked into that before. And it comes from the term hystera, right? So if you look at it, it goes way back where we were diagnosed with hysteria, that at times women were having behavioral changes as they aged, and those weren't conforming to society's standards. So that was known as hysteria. The root word comes from the Greek, the ancient Greeks. The word for womb is hystra. And the very presence of the womb, they decided, was the cause of hysteria, the changes in mood and emotion. It caused hysteria. So the result was a hysterectomy. So really interesting how the gender bias factors into a lot of women health issues. So you should look into some of those. It's important that we know these factors so that we can always advocate for ourselves. And a lot of you are sharing some information, and I will go over those as we proceed through. And we'll have a longer time at the end where we can share a little bit more. So let's look at ADHD throughout a woman's lifespan, because it does change, right? The women tend to have different symptoms than males, and it does change throughout our lifetime as well, okay? And so that is really important for us to look at right now. When we're in childhood, the presentation of ADHD symptoms in girls were more likely to be inattentive, less hyperactive. And when I look up here at Pamela, she says there is a stereotype that only presents as fidgety behavior. Mine was more daydreamy, off in the clouds behavior. So Pamela, you are describing exactly what we're saying here. That's very typical. Daydreaming, disorganization, and forgetfulness. You may have been very bright in childhood and you were able to compensate and excel in school because you were very bright, or are very bright, I should say. And so you may have been daydreamy, but doing well academically because you were so bright and you could compensate. This brings in some challenges, though. Because you are the daydreamer, you're excelling in school, that leads to oftentimes a misdiagnosis or a delayed diagnosis. Because then those symptoms are often attributed to personality traits rather than external factors like stress. So we're attributing them a lot of times to personality traits. So if you look at what Pamela said, she even described her behavior as, I believe she said, off in the clouds behavior, right? So a lot of times when a little girl is daydreaming or disorganized, then the answer is, oh, she's just a little flighty girl. She's just a daydreamer. It's okay. She'll outgrow it, which we know is not true either, that 90% of children with ADHD carry these challenges into adulthood. So that's where we're tying, this is the wrong thing to do, but we're tying those uh, personality traits to just simply being a little girl and not getting to the root cause. Because the little boy who may be more hyperactive and disruptive is going to get the diagnosis. And that goes to Pamela also says, my son was diagnosed before I was. I wasn't diagnosed until my 60s. I just kept hyper focusing to survive. So you, Pam, you're bringing up a lot of important information that we're going to be covering through this. So you can really identify with this journey as well as many others here. So then once we move into adolescence, so in childhood, you may have been misdiagnosed or not diagnosed at all, overlooked because you were more of the daydreamer. We move into adolescence and there are new challenges and new presentations. So the changes and challenges during teenage years include hormonal changes. A lot of individuals here have brought up PMS. And that can actually cause challenges with ADHD. PMS symptoms, the change in hormones, can negatively affect or exacerbate the ADHD symptoms. And the increased social pressures can also exacerbate ADHD symptoms because as a teenage girl, you are expected by society to be really social, right? You need to be social and have lots of friends, and you have to sustain those friendships, and you have to simultaneously be very organized and excel academically. And all of those social pressures exacerbate your ADHD symptoms oftentimes. And also, the academics start to become a little bit harder. Remember when we talked about in childhood where you may have been excelling academically because you were bright and you could compensate in those early years? Around middle school, that's where we expect everyone to have strong executive function. Now, that goes into another issue where no one is born with strong executive function, but we all have the potential to develop it. And that development starts right after birth and continues through our mid to late 20s. Unfortunately, we expect everyone to have strong executive function by the time they hit middle school. So that's where, even though you are very bright, you may have seen your academic performance go downhill because you were struggling with those longer assignments. They were expecting you to be more organized and be able to prioritize and be independent. And those skills weren't there. And so that's where academics sometimes get a little bit harder or more challenging. You may be able to relate to that, or you may be seeing that in your daughter as well. Also, the risk of comorbid conditions increases in adolescence. Okay. Yeah, Ricky is mentioning the hormonal changes and PMS, and she said, so I'm not crazy, and I am PMSing 2 weeks before my period. It is hard, it is difficult, and it does exacerbate those symptoms. So in our adolescence, again, there is a risk of misdiagnosis. And what occurs here is that masking starts to occur, right? Because of those societal expectations, girls tend to start masking their struggles, fearing judgment or misunderstanding. Because remember, what also comes into play here, another symptom of ADHD is rejection sensitive dysphoria. And so that fear of rejection becomes overwhelming. And so, of course, you're going to start masking because you really want to be accepted. You don't want to be rejected. You don't want to be seen as a failure. So, that is a big part of the masking process. As a result, your symptoms may be mistaken for anxiety, depression, or other mental health issues, leading to, again, a misdiagnosis. Okay. Camille says we homeschool, and so this shift is magnified. I feel that shifting to school may help my daughter pay attention, possibly because others would be trying to do school along with her. Maybe, Camille, and that's something to look at, but you could only make that judgment because that's going to be very different for everyone. Okay. So now we've looked at the child, right? The child who is misdiagnosed or just completely missed. The adolescent who starts masking symptoms. So again, flies under the radar, maybe misdiagnosed. And then we get to adulthood. And in adulthood, you may continue to have negative impact on your career, your relationships, and your self-esteem. Now, some of you here may be thinking, this isn't exactly my journey. And that's very true. This is just a, an overview of what tends to occur. But of course, we all have different experiences. And some of you may be thinking, when I got to adulthood, I can excel at work. I do really well at work. I can manage projects. I come up with great ideas. I lead a team. Work is going great for me. But then when I get outside of that business world in my home life or my personal life, that's where things start to fall apart. My home is in disarray. I forget to text friends back, so it negatively affects my relationships. You may be seeing, why can I do so well in this area, and yet I'm struggling in that area? And that can lead to some confusion as well, because if you hear the term attention deficit, you think that that means you absolutely have no ability to pay attention, right? It's a deficit of attention. It's a deficit in all of these cognitive skill areas. But that's not so, is it? It's not that you have a lack of attention. It's not that you have a complete deficit of attention. As someone said here, it may have been Pamela who said that you were just hyper focusing to survive. So hyper focus you can do if you're really interested or if it's highly stimulating, you have that ability to hyper focus. And so you see glimpses of fantastic attention. You see glimpses of great memory. You see glimpses of amazing task completion. And yet it's the inconsistency that is the hallmark of ADHD. So we have to look at the inconsistency of cognitive control and how that affects your life overall to really see that ADHD, again, a misnomer, but you will see glimpses of cognitive control. We have to look at the inconsistency and work on developing those cognitive skills so that you can have control at will. So again, the expectations for women to fulfill multiple roles flawlessly, again, as you get into adulthood, you're expected to be attentive mothers, organized professionals, supportive friends, and this intensifies the ADHD symptoms, which again leads to more masking and strategies that you're developing for yourself, strategies where you're working so hard. Many of you may feel, I get through the day, but at the end of the day, I'm exhausted because I feel like I have to work so hard in order to complete what other people seem to be doing with ease. Okay. And again, this is where the masking comes in, because you want to rise to the occasion. You think that you should be able to do it all. And yet, when you mask, then it oftentimes will lead to you not asking for help. And you may just simply be confused. Like I said, if you think it's an attention deficit and that doesn't really describe me, you really have to look at the inconsistency, not the 100% lack of attention in those cognitive areas. Okay. Aziza says that all of this has led to burnout. Absolutely. Definitely. Then we become in that wonderful stage of perimenopause and menopause. I have been through both, so I can attest to the effects here. Now, when we go into perimenopause and menopause, this really does exacerbate the issues and the symptoms of ADHD. I found these stats really interesting. Attitude Magazine did a survey of nearly 5,000 women with ADHD. 63% of the respondents, 45 years of age and older, said the greatest impact on their lives, ADHD had the greatest impact on their lives during perimenopause and menopause. Isn't that, I don't know if you've seen those stats before, but that is amazing. 63% said this was the time where their ADHD symptoms really negatively impacted their lives. More than 93% said they noticed a difference in the severity and some ADHD symptoms during perimenopause and menopause. And I've heard a lot of our clients that we've talked to say that they had no idea that they had ADHD until this very moment of their lives. And so that can be part of that journey we talked about that is so difficult, where you think, how did I get through my entire life doing so well? And all of a sudden, it seems like my world is falling apart. Christy says, I agree. Went through menopause. It was awful. It is a challenge for certain, Christy. Hormonal changes impact ADHD symptoms. Attica says she's glad she's not the only one. As estrogen levels decrease, women with ADHD, like we said, experience a worsening of symptoms and also experience new symptoms. And this is the one thing I think I hear most often from women who've gone through menopause and have ADHD. I had all of these strategies in place, and suddenly those strategies completely stopped working. I knew how to do all of this. And then suddenly it was like I had no idea how to get through my day. That is so common. And I hear that all the time, because not only are those hormonal changes exacerbating the ADHD symptoms, but menopause alone, even if you do not have ADHD, menopause alone brings about symptoms like insomnia, mood swings, anxiety. And I can tell you, as a woman who does not have ADHD, but did go through menopause, I did feel at times that I was losing my mind. I cannot tell you how many items have ended up in the refrigerator for no apparent reason. One morning I found my keys, my car keys in the refrigerator, and the carton of milk in the kitchen cabinet. So you do feel like these symptoms are just making it extremely difficult to get through the day. So you combine the just typical symptoms of menopause with the symptoms of ADHD, and it's kind of like you have the perfect storm. This is where increased awareness and support is needed. Unfortunately, and I'm sorry, some of my slides, I didn't account for my head being in the way, but I did want to say that although this is a critical time where you need support, there are no studies that specifically examine menopause in females with ADHD. None. So this is a serious medical problem. So we need to look at, again, that societal masking effect and the misunderstanding of symptoms throughout a woman's lifetime contributes significantly to the underdiagnosis and the misdiagnosis of ADHD in females. And it also highlights the need for greater awareness and tailored diagnostic criteria. We are moving in that direction. There are efforts being made to close the gender gap in ADHD diagnosis and treatment. There are more women now, more girls now than ever, who are being diagnosed with ADHD. Between 2020 and 2022, the ADHD diagnosis among women actually doubled. And so that kind of goes to what I was talking about in my journey, where our largest growing population over the last 4 years is women. And so that does speak to that. So we are seeing more women being diagnosed. And I think that it's great and it's so empowering for women to know, oh, now that explains what I've been going through, right? A lot of women that I talk to, they feel this sense of relief many times because they now understand why they've been struggling. But sometimes there's also, there's mixed emotions because there's that relief, more understanding, but then there's also a little bit of anger or sadness at not knowing before adulthood, not knowing what they were going through or having that understanding. So I know that it can be a really difficult time. With the change in the diagnosis, we're seeing, instead of calling it ADHD and ADD, right, getting away from just attention deficit hyperactive disorder, we've moved to ADHD inattentive, hyperactive, or combined. The advent of ADHD inattentive really did move more females into the diagnostic criteria. So more women were diagnosed when that ADHD inattentive awareness came about. Now, the combined type, it's not as prevalent within women, but when we look at the combined type, where it's inattentive and hyperactive combined, you need to keep in mind that females present in a very unique way. So instead of being physically hyperactive, you may be hyper-talkative rather than physically hyperactive. Or you may be verbally impulsive, where you find that you're saying things and then afterwards you think, why did I say that? So you may be verbally impulsive rather than physically impulsive. And this is a really common area for daughters as well. I hear this a lot from our clients where they say, my daughter talks so much. And so that is something to look at if there's a combination of symptoms. Linda, you will get a recording, absolutely. And you want the recording on rejection dysphoria. Yes, we will have a recording of this, and then we do also have a recording of rejection sensitivity dysphoria. So I'll make certain I can include both of those in the follow-up. And there's a lot of great webinars and information on our YouTube channel. So I'll include all those links, okay? Pamela says this can be really devastating in your career unless you're aware of it. Absolutely. And that's why this time together is really important, because no matter where you are in your journey, it's important to keep this awareness about you. So the gender gap has narrowed over the last 12 years. Okay. And in 2010, males were 133% more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD than females. That's incredible. But by 2022, this gap was reduced to 28%. So we are making progress. There is more awareness. There's still work to be done, especially in the area of menopause, right? Where there's no data at all. Well, there's no scientific study. We need more awareness, more studies, more knowledge, but we are making progress. Rebecca, I understand. Rebecca says, I often feel as if I have Tourette's of the paragraph. So you're talking about that hyper talkative or where you are impulsively saying things when you don't mean to. All right. I will include, a lot of people are asking about our other recordings. I will include our YouTube channel in my follow-up. I will send that immediately following, okay? So let's look at the facts. We've gone through a lot of information so far. I know there's a lot more out there, but we've kind of summarized the lifespan and the changes of ADHD presentation in women over time. The fact is that ADHD is a condition that affects the way your brain works. This means that the difficulties it causes are because of a medical condition, not because of a character flaw. And that's what I think you need to keep in mind. This is not a character flaw. ADHD is real. It affects women. Hormone changes exacerbate the symptoms of ADHD. You are not unintelligent. You are not lazy. You are not unmotivated. You're actually amazing. I think a lot of times challenges arise because we focus so much on the negatives of ADHD, but there are so many positive characteristics of ADHD. And I want you all to keep those in mind. The creativity, the hyper focus, the spontaneity, all of these can be such positives in your life. Now, we need to keep these in mind because I think one of the hardest things for me to see when I'm in a consultation is that I start with, tell me about your strengths. And a lot of you can tell me your strengths, and that is fantastic. You've kept those on your radar. But many times I have a woman who is later in life, has been struggling, and there are some tears. And oftentimes I hear, I don't know what my strengths are anymore. I used to know my strengths, but it's almost like I've lost sight of them. And so I always want you to refer to your personal list. What are your strengths? Because there are some amazing characteristics that you have. And I'm going to, if you would like, I will share this list with you so you can put it on your phone, you can post it next to your mirror, and you can refer to these strengths if you ever start forgetting. So what we need to look at is how we can pinpoint the underlying cognitive skills that we need in order to have strong executive function so that we can develop strong executive function and really enhance all of these positives. Okay. There are a lot of comments and questions, and I promise I will get back to them. I'm going to address some of them and even go through them afterwards if I don't get to address everyone's comment, okay? But please do keep your comments and questions coming. So we looked at changing that ADHD diagnosis to the ADHD inattentive, hyperactive, and the combined. We also need to start looking at reframing ADHD as executive dysfunction or weak executive function. And there are many benefits to looking at it that way. Remember, if you're not familiar with executive function, I know many of you here are, but we talked about how everyone's in a different point. Executive function is a set of mental processes that help you get through the day to day, right? Executive function is a set of mental processes. It allows you to control your attention, your behaviors, your emotions. It allows you to plan and prioritize, organize, avoid procrastination, and remain on task. These are all processes that we use every day, but they tend to be weak for individuals with attention difficulties. And like we mentioned, there are a lot of factors that can inhibit this development, one of which is ADHD. It could be a traumatic brain injury. It could be anxiety, depression. It could be a combination of those. So it's important that no matter where we are in our lives, we take a step back to start developing skills. Let's look at the benefits of reframing. Okay. There's more of a precision in diagnosis, emphasizes the specific cognitive processes that are impaired rather than a broad set of behavioral symptoms. It allows us to reduce that stigma. It emphasizes that the difficulties are rooted in brain function, not a character flaw or lack of effort. It also allows us to look at targeted interventions. If we understand ADHD as executive dysfunction or weak executive function, it can lead to more targeted interventions that addresses those underlying cognitive skills. And that's really important to look at, right? Because we want to develop those foundations in order to improve executive function. It also allows us to look at more holistic support, encourages a holistic view of support, integrating cognitive training with perhaps lifestyle adjustments as well. So let's look at some suggestions. And I know we're going through a lot of information here, but I do want to give you a little bit of a take home. Let's look at some strategies, some practical cognitive strategies that you can start incorporating. Some of these you may have already started to incorporate, maybe some you haven't started to incorporate. So just look at all of the strategies. I'm going to just share a few because I don't want to overwhelm everyone. And just start with one. Start with one strategy and gradually build up, because I know our tendency is to, I'm going to do it all, but don't try to do it all, right? Try to do one well, and then maybe start incorporating another one. And as we start incorporating these strategies or these lifestyle changes, these can support a supportive framework that helps us manage our ADHD symptoms and improve executive function. And we know before we go into the strategies, you may be thinking, it's too late for me. I can't change. I'm older. I've even had some parents who have said, well, she's 15. Is it too late? No, it is never too late. We know through neuroplasticity that the brain is moldable, it's shapeable. And if we provide this, if we provide the brain with the proper stimuli, the proper challenge and feedback, you can create these new neural pathways that are required for strong executive function. So we know through neuroplasticity that age is not a factor. We also know that labels like ADHD are not a factor. If we provide you the right challenge, you can create these new neural pathways that are required for executive function. One that you can try is mindful breathing exercise. This is a strategy that you can use. And actually, I use it throughout the day when I need to transition, because transitions are hard for everyone, but especially if you have ADHD. I always do this prior to starting a webinar, just kind of to get some clarity and clear my mind of everything else that has happened during the day so far. So mindful breathing exercises, you don't have to do a long period of time. It could just be 5 minutes. Just take a 5-minute break when you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed or scattered. Mindful breathing exercises can significantly enhance cognitive control. One really easy one behind my head is the 4-7-8 method. That means breathing in for 4 seconds, holding the breath for 7 seconds, and then breathing out for 8. That's one strategy you can start incorporating, one step to lay the framework for strong executive function. Try some mindful breathing exercises throughout the day. Easy one is the 4-7-8. Breathe in for 4, hold for 7, breathe out for 8. Regular physical activity, this is critically important. And it's really interesting because as I was preparing for this presentation, I do practice, what I'm going to say and how to present. and review my material. And last night at the end of the day, I was exhausted and I was trying to practice what I was going to say to all of you today. And I was tongue-tied. I didn't have great focus. I was distracted. It was not going well. I took my slides and I got on the elliptical and I started practicing while doing physical activity. And I had much more clarity. I was able to go through my presentation much better. So regular physical exercise and activity does make a difference. And it can be anything. Just make certain you incorporate some type of physical activity in your day, because we know that physical activity actually promotes neurogenesis. That means the growth of new brain cells. We see that even in a walk. Even if you go for a brisk walk during the day, that promotes neurogenesis and it enhances executive function. Also, healthy nutrition. You hear a lot about omega-3 fatty acids helping. You know that antioxidants that you get from lots of fruits and vegetables is important. But I think one of the more difficult things is planning your meals and getting regular balanced meals throughout the day. So try to start looking at your meal planning so that you're getting a healthy breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So when you can do a consistent, healthy eating regimen, it will help maintain steady blood sugar levels and prevent those energy crashes. It promotes sustained attention and mental clarity. So you may know all of the ingredients you need to have a balanced meal. Take that and try to make certain that you are scheduling your meals throughout the day, because that is one area that's a challenge, right? That consistency. Also, sleep hygiene. You may think that if I get 4 hours of sleep, that's good enough, right? But sleep hygiene is so important. That doesn't mean just sleeping, but that means what you do in preparation for sleep, right? What is your sequence of events to make certain you get a good night's sleep? And that means stopping all screen time at least an hour before bedtime. Start winding down, start dimming your lights. There are certain steps you can take in order to make certain you get a good solid night's sleep. Because remember, when you're asleep, your brain is working overtime, right? When you get specifically into deep sleep, into REM sleep, that's when your brain is pruning away information you no longer use, you no longer need. It's taking all of that information you learned that day and it's assimilating it with prior knowledge. So this is where your memories and get your memory your memories are formed, as I stutter over the word memory. Your memories are formed. So this is a really critical time. The better sleep you get, the more focused you are, the better you're able to regulate your emotions, and it just simply helps with executive function. So start looking into sleep hygiene and what steps you can take prior to sleep in order to ensure a good quality night's sleep. We also have a webinar on that in on our YouTube channel. It's an oldie but a goodie, so it is there as well. Then we're going to talk about time management techniques. And some of you may be thinking, please don't give me another strategy on time management. I've tried them all and they don't work. Some of them really do work for many of you. Okay, so you may say that Pomodoro timer really works. I worked with a woman just the other day and she said, I was amazed. It actually did keep me on track. But others of you may say, well, the Pomodoro or the time blocking doesn't really work for me. I understand the concept, but when I time block or I set my Pomodoro timer for 25 minutes, I can set the timer for 25 minutes, but when the time starts, I'm still distracted by my colleagues speaking in the other room. I still am having a hard time prioritizing what I should do. And so that's where we get to I want you to have the tips and strategies. I want you to have those time management techniques, but we must simultaneously get to the root cause and start developing skills. Because in order for that Pomodoro timer to work for you, you have to be able to sustain your attention for that 25 minutes. We have to work on mindfulness so that you're able to stay in the present moment and calm that internal dialogue. We have to work on filtering distractions so that you're not constantly distracted by everything around you. We have to work on impulse control so that you're not impulsively jumping to something else that wasn't on the agenda. So, sustained attention, mindfulness, filtering distractions, impulse control, processing information. Those are the types of skills we're talking about when we talk about developing the foundational skills that are required for strong executive function. So, tips and strategies are good, but we want to simultaneously develop skills. And that's what we do within Play Attention. We get to the root cause and start a systematic approach to developing cognitive skills that right now may be weak for you, but are required for strong executive function. We have our body wave armband, and I don't know if you've seen this. If you have not yet seen it, we do have a webinar on the 29th where we'll go through everything about Play Attention. You can register for that or request a one-on-one consultation so we can talk about all of your specific needs and explain how we can customize a plan. But on the back, there are 3 sensors. When I slide this armband on my arm, those sensors now monitor my brain activity that tells us how attentive I am. And then that information is given over to the computer where I'm allowed to control all of the cognitive exercises just with my mind, or more specifically, my attention alone. And I receive constant and immediate feedback as to whether or not I truly am focused and paying attention. And that's a really important first step in the learning process, right? No matter where you are in your journey, if you have felt that you can't pay attention, you never pay attention, within the first couple of minutes of Play Attention, you're actually going to be rewarded for paying attention. We're providing you with an experience where you see your attention, you feel what you're doing, and you work on not only attention, but all of these other cognitive exercises, all of these other cognitive skills that right now are weak, but required for executive function. You are going to power all of these exercises with your mind alone. No, Aziza, it does not monitor anything but attentive state. Okay. It is monitoring your brain activity that tells us how attentive you are. Okay. And that is really important in the learning process. And Nikki, I will get back to that. I'm going to go a little bit further as well, and then come back to your question because that's a good question. So these are really important, okay? And we can develop these skills. Remember, despite our current wiring, we know age is not a factor, labels are not a factor. You can develop these skills. And we do this in a very systematic way. Now, if you're uncertain about what cognitive skill areas you want to improve, we do have an assessment online. So you can just type in assessment or test, and I will make certain that you get that link so that you can go through that assessment process so that you have a little bit more clarity on what you would like to address as far as those foundational skills. Or also, it allows us, if you're looking at starting your Play Attention journey, that you'll be able to assess what cognitive skill areas do we want to put in your customized plan or your family's plan. So you can go ahead and type in assessment or test, and we can look at that as well. Consultations are also available if you want to review, as I mentioned, your specific needs and talk about a customized plan to help you develop those skills. We are running a cognitive campout challenge this summer. So we have a summer cognitive campout challenge for families, specifically for families with ADHD. And when you start Play Attention, you'll actually be enrolled into our Cognitive Campout Challenge. Now, I say it's for ADHD families, but if you're an individual and you want to join that challenge, there are lots of benefits. So I'd be happy to send you more information on that as well. It's just going to be a fun way to kickstart your training and improve executive function in just 10 minutes a day. Now, I know that we've gone for almost an hour, and so I just want to give you a little summary and some next steps, and then I will go back to all of some of the questions that have been asked about the program, about specifics on ADHD in women. I will get back to that if you can stay on this webinar. If you need to go, just remember we will send out the recording. So let's summarize what we discussed so far. We know that ADHD is often underdiagnosed in women due to gender biases and societal expectations. We know that ADHD affects women differently throughout your lifetime, from childhood to menopause. ADHD in women can be more accurately understood as executive dysfunction, affecting cognitive processes. And practical strategies. Remember all those practical strategies we talked about, such as mindful breathing exercises, regular physical activity can improve executive function and cognitive control. Also, tools like Play Attention can offer valuable support to help develop those foundational skills that may be weak for you. And we look forward to working with all of you very soon. Thanks again, everyone, and have a great afternoon.